The financial earthquake just hit America's most prestigious university. And the shockwaves are spreading across the entire educational establishment. President Trump has taken action that Harvard administrators never thought possible, and the dollar amount involved will leave you speechless. What connection did we discover between this Ivy League institution and George Soros? How many billions sit in Harvard's endowment while they demand taxpayer money? And what statement did the university president make that reveals their complete contempt for American values? Well, the ivory towers are trembling and their funding fortress crumbles. And tonight we're revealing the full scope of this historic academic reckoning. So are you ready to face colder weather, even though summer is on its way? Yes, the cold nights are still here. While Harvard faces Trump's funding freeze, Americans will spend more heating than usual, a staggering $941 average, just as Trump is cutting Harvard's access. You need to trim your heating budget. That's why I rely on this compact but powerful mini heater that warms any room instantly. No preheating required. While elite universities waste billions, this energy-efficient device delivers customized comfort without skyrocketing costs. It includes overheat protection, adjustable heat levels, and operates silently. So take control of your comfort at staywarmnow.com with up to 60% off and free shipping today. So let's jump into this. The press secretary was on fire earlier today asking about American taxpayer dollars.
Federal agents.
Why do Ivy League schools get so much federal funding?
It's a very good question, and it's a question the president has obviously raised in his discussions and negotiations with not just Harvard, but also Columbia and many other Ivy League institutions. We have the antisemitism task force, which the president promised and delivered on. The anti-Semitism task forces across the government, representatives from various federal agencies who meet on a weekly basis to discuss the question that you just raised. And I think a lot of Americans are wondering why their tax dollars are going to these universities when they are not only indoctrinating our nation's students, but also allowing such egregious, illegal behavior to occur.
Why do...
Here's the press secretary talking about how the president made it clear to Harvard.
When it comes to Harvard, the president's position on this is grounded in common sense. In the basic principle that Jewish American students or students of any faith should not be illegally harassed and targeted on our nation's college campuses. And we unfortunately saw that illegal discrimination take place on the campus of Harvard. There are countless examples to prove it, particularly with the stunning confession by then Harvard President Claudine Gay, who said that bullying and harassment depended on the context. The president at that time made it clear to the American public he was not going to tolerate illegal harassment and anti-Semitism taking place in violations of federal law. So the president made it clear to Harvard, follow federal law, no longer break Title VI, which was passed by Congress to ensure no student can be discriminated against on the basis of race, and you will receive federal funding. Unfortunately, Harvard has not taken the president or the administration's demands seriously. All the president is asking, don't break federal law, and then you can have your federal funding. I think the president is also begging a good question. More than $2 billion out the door to Harvard when they have a more than $50 billion endowment. Why are the American taxpayers subsidizing a university that has billions of dollars in the bank already? And we certainly should not be funding a place where such grave anti-Semitism exists.
Oh, and if you need an example, let's take a look at this. 22 hours ago, this was posted by Libercrap. Their only quote, Harvard has fallen. Seems pretty one-sided to me, right? Let's keep going. The rabbit hole. Americans are not obligated to subsidize institutions with their taxpayer dollars. If Harvard refuses to abide by the Civil Rights Act and remove its race preference programs, then they deserve to lose taxpayer funding. Here's Harvard University posting, the university will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights. Neither Harvard nor any other private university can allow itself to be taken over by the federal government. That's how they see this. And the president in his administration freezing $2.2 billion in federal grants to Harvard after the private university defied demands relating to campus diversity programs, protest regulations, and hiring practices. Harvard says it will not surrender. Here is the Daily Signal. America's Victor David Hansen says America's elite universities are violating the spirit of the U.S. Constitution. Last week, the Trump administration sent a letter to Harvard University President Alan Garber threatening to revoke federal grants unless the administrators took steps to discontinue its policies. Check this out.
These are hotbeds, especially the elite campuses, of indoctrination, and they're polling about 35% of the approval rate of the American people, with 90 to 95% of their law or their humanities faculty openly Democratic and left-wing. There is no diversity. They have separate graduations predicated on race, separate spaces, but separate dormitories. What am I getting at? The Trump administration wants to call them to account. And they have a lot of levers at the universities, apparently, like Princeton or Columbia, don't seem to take seriously. They're dependent on millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars of federal money. Why, I don't know, because they have multi-billion-dollar endowments. But nonetheless, they're predicated, their budgets, on federal monies. But the Trump administration says, you're not obeying the First or the Fourth or Fifth or Sixth Amendments. You're not guaranteeing the Bill of Rights to your own student. You're allowing antisemitism in the year 2025. As if it's the 19th century or something. What are you doing? And the universities seem to ignore it. Well, we'll stop people wearing masks. They don't. We'll stop anti-Semitism. They don't. Why? They seem, first of all, to be indebted to foreign students. We have about 300,000 Chinese students and maybe 250,000 from the Middle East that pay full tuition. And they're a powerful bloc on campus. In addition, we have billions of dollars from Mideast sheikdoms like Qatar, but also China, that endow professorships. And you give $1 billion, you can get 100 or more, 150 fully endowed professors for a Middle East student department that can be very influential, training this country's next generation of diplomats and civil servants and politicians. But the university should be very careful. They have a lot of exposure. Already the National Institute of Health says, we know what you're doing. You're on individual grants from the government. You're charging 50, 60%. That's not going to happen. 15% tops. That's going to cut hundreds of millions of dollars out of their budget. Now the Congress is saying, we know what you're doing. You're not nonpartisan. You're not non-ideological. You're going to pay a tax, an income tax, on your huge endowment income. That could be 100, 150 million in some cases. Now the administration says, you're not defenders of civil rights, you're offenders. And we are going to cut back grants to you because you don't follow the Bill of Rights. You do not guarantee freedom of speech. You do not follow civil rights statutes and make race and gender and sexual orientation incidental rather than essential to these students' personas. And you give them preferences based on their superficial appearance. In other words, what I'm getting at is they are violating the spirit and the letter of the Constitution. These are hotbeds.
Wow. Yeah, it's all coming to an end. Harvard University President Alan Garber, no government, regardless of what parties in power, should dictate what private universities can teach. Let's hear what Fox had to say.
It reads, welcome back. Breaking just moments ago, Harvard's lawyers say that the university will not comply with the Trump administration's demands in a brand new letter. It reads in part, quote, Harvard is not prepared to agree to demands that go beyond the lawful authority of this or any administration. Sandra, the administration had been threatening to pull federal funding from a lot of these Ivy League schools if they didn't get their ducks in order when it comes to fighting anti-Semitism on campus. They're not bluffing. They've already pulled the funding. So Harvard's essentially saying, are they trying to call a bluff here?
Yeah. So I imagine there will be a quick response, and we'll have that for you when it happens.
President Trump's administration announced it was freezing $2.3 billion in federal funding to Harvard. Reuters reporting it 15 hours ago, after the university rejected numerous demands from the Trump administration. Here is Michael Rappaport. The hate and discrimination on Harvard, the rest of the universities, was towards literally any other group of people. This low-life politician would be up in arms. This guy, this is wild because he's totally leftist.
Blacks, UPenn, Columbia, Harvard, the highest of the highest Harvard. If the that has been going on at these college campuses, these universities, and they were talking about blacks, Greeks, Spanish, Asians. Oh, sorry, Harvard already discriminated against Asians. If this is going on about any other group of people, Barack Obama, Bernie Sanders, AOC, and the rest of you be in head over heels calling for an intifada at Harvard University, and that's cool, and Barack Obama, Bernie Sanders, and the rest, each and every one of you has the audacity to politicize this shit, politicizing this shit, defund that dump. Harvard, Columbia, Cornell, defund them all. These are supposed to be smart people, and they're ran by dum-dums. And you got people supporting them simply because they don't like Trump. It ain't right what the has been going on in these college campuses. It is not right. And people support that shit. Harvard's staying strong. They're being smart. Oh, Harvard is doing the right thing. They're not bowing down. Harvard, Columbia, UPenn. Anybody that supports this shit. Anybody. I don't give a who you are, what you did, president, senator, governor. You scumbag. If this was black people, this is people that like dogs, cats, none of it would be acceptable. With Jews and Zionists, it's cool. The out of here. UPenn.
Oh, man. Yeah, he didn't hold back, did he? Here is Elise Stefanik with Sean Hannity supporting President Trump's decision to defund Harvard.
Risks, sadly. Today, Harvard announced that it will defy President Trump's order to cut DEI programs and expel pro-Hamas protesters, putting the school's federal funding at risk. Sadly, this is not the first time schools like Harvard sided with, a designated terror organization like Hamas. You might recall. Take a look.
At MIT, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate MIT's code of conduct or rules regarding bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
If targeted at individuals not making public statements.
If it is directed and severe or pervasive, it is harassment.
So the answer is yes.
It is a context-dependent decision, Congresswoman. Anti-Semitic rhetoric, when it
and is it anti-Semitic rhetoric?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric, when it crosses into conduct that amounts to bullying, harassment, intimidation, that is actionable conduct, and we do take action.
So the answer is yes, that calling for the genocide of Jews violates Harvard Code of Conduct, correct?
Again, it depends on the context.
It does not depend on the context. The answer is yes, and this is why you should resign. These are unacceptable answers across the board.
All right, here with reaction, New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. Would you have gotten the same answer if it had to do with transgender or LGBTQ plus or a race issue? I tend to think not, Congresswoman.
Of course not, Sean. And think about that. That hearing occurred during the Biden administration. And what did we see from Joe Biden? Zero action to protect Jewish students on campuses and to hold these universities accountable. 2 of those 3 university presidents were forced to resign, and there was an additional 4 from other universities that were forced to resign. But President Trump correctly made the correct decision to defund these institutions. If you look at what they required for Harvard, it was protection of Jewish students. It is making sure that we are getting rid of DEI, which by definition is anti-Semitic. And instead, Harvard is acting more entitled than ever. President Trump made the direct and correct decision to defund to the tune of over $2 billion. These higher ed institutions that have fundamentally lost their way. U.S. taxpayer dollars should never be propping up anti-Semitism, and the vast majority of the American people support President Trump and support the work that we are doing in Congress to hold these higher ed institutions accountable.
Okay. If, as a country, we want to help kids get through a local community college that's relatively inexpensive, or maybe a trade school, I think American taxpayers would be far more accepting of that. Why should one taxpayer dollar go to these elite institutions and so-called institutions of education, when they have billions and billions and billions of dollars in endowments, why don't they pay for their own scholarships? Why are they relying on, hardworking carpenters and nurses and bricklayers and everybody in between, landscapers, to pay for somebody's Harvard education?
You are spot on, Sean, and the vast majority of the American people do not want to prop up these institutions. I myself am a first-generation college graduate. I graduated from Harvard. That's clearly not the achievement. The achievement is maintaining my common sense and my conservatism and my strong values with which I was raised in, and strong moral leadership. There is so much opportunity across this country for the next generation, whether it's in the workforce, whether it's in this manufacturing renaissance that is going to happen under President Donald J. Trump, whether it's community colleges or trade schools, vocational programs. That is a pathway to success. Higher education has fundamentally lost its way, and it's increasingly out of touch, and the tuition rates go higher and higher. So we need to defund across the board, and President Trump is rightly holding these schools accountable.
Wall Street apes. American universities are not what you think, and intertwined with George Soros. Mike Benz says Harvard Endowment and George Soros Quantum Fund were given basically no competitor closed auction bid on the sale of those formerly government-held assets. What?
$1 billion. I think that their universities are just, professors teaching, teaching students about a particular topic. They don't understand that, for example, that the Harvard Endowment has made a huge amount of its $50 billion by working with the U.S. State Department in foreign regime change operations. I mean, this came out in the 1990s when Jeffrey Sachs was the head of the Harvard Endowment for International Development, was personally petitioning USAID for something like $500 million to administer the economic privatization of Russia during that shock therapy period. The Harvard Endowment and George Soros's Quantum Fund were given basically a no competitor closed auction bid on the sale of those formerly Soviet government held assets, and Harvard is getting billions of dollars in grants in total from the U.S. government while they're doing favors to them. The same thing with Columbia University, the same thing with Stanford University. Americans think that the universities are something that they are. I don't want to say that they're not, but that they're only partially. They think that they're universities.
So what's Harvard's response to losing billions? They say they won't surrender their independence. Independence from what? Federal law? Reality? They've got Soros tentacles in their endowment, controlling former Soviet assets through Harvard shell fronts. This is not a university. It's a globalist launch pad. At least Stefanik's right. Taxpayers do not want to fund anti-Semitism or the systematic shredding of America's foundation. The walls are closing in, and the universities know it. They violated the Constitution, weaponized education, and laughed at the people footing the bill. But now Trump is slamming the door. In Yale, Princeton, Columbia, your turn is coming. So here's my question, everyone watching. Drop a comment. Should all universities that promote anti-Semitism and hate America lose every federal dollar they receive? I want to hear your response. And make sure you support the Next News Network with a t-shirt or a hat from our merch shop. Link down below at shop.nextnewsnetwork.com.